It all started in a dimly lit conference room. Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, sat across from a group of federal investigators, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the cold, polished wood of the table. The room was filled with hushed whispers as Bondi unfolded a series of documents that could change everything. The papers she held weren't just any legal filings. They were evidence that pointed directly to Judge Boasberg, a respected figure in the federal judiciary, known for his fair rulings. But beneath that polished reputation was a trail of questionable actions that had gone unnoticed, until now. Bondi had been digging into a high-profile case involving political corruption when she stumbled upon something that made her stomach turn. Hidden in the margins of a court ruling was a series of decisions that didn't just skirt ethical boundaries, they broke them. And there it was, in black and white, Judge Boasberg had been manipulating evidence, influencing outcomes, and allowing political pressures to shape his judgments. It was like a dark undercurrent of corruption that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. Bondi knew this couldn't be ignored. As she flipped through the pages, one thing became clear. She wasn't just facing a scandal, this was a full-blown conspiracy. And it wasn't just about the case she had been investigating, it was about the very system of justice itself. She took a deep breath and called in the investigators. The room grew tense as she began to speak, her voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. "We have a major problem. Judge Boasberg's actions go beyond ethical violations. These are criminal offenses. And I believe we have the proof we need to take him down." The investigators leaned in, their eyes locked on the evidence she presented. They knew this was bigger than they could have imagined. But it wasn't just about the judge anymore, it was about the entire justice system and how deeply it had been compromised. "Prepare for a full investigation," Bondi said, her tone resolute. "This won't just be a scandal. It's going to be a reckoning." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Bondi had just set the stage for a battle that would shake the foundation of the legal world. The investigation began quietly, almost too quietly. At first, no one wanted to believe the extent of the accusations against Judge Boasberg. He was well respected, known for his measured and seemingly impartial rulings. Few could fathom that the very man who had once been trusted to uphold the law was now suspected of breaking it in the most fundamental ways. Pam Bondi, however, wasn't about to let the case fade into the background. As former Attorney General, she had a reputation for fighting corruption with unwavering tenacity. She was well aware that the moment she went public, her entire career would be on the line. But that was a risk she was willing to take. The truth was more important than personal reputation. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a series of shocking revelations. It wasn't just minor violations of legal ethics, it was a calculated pattern of actions designed to manipulate judicial outcomes for personal and political gain. Hidden emails, clandestine meetings, and off-the-record phone calls revealed a judge whose allegiances were compromised, whose actions were self-serving. What was even more disturbing was the connection to high-level political figures. Boasberg had allegedly been influenced by powerful figures in Washington, his rulings swayed in favor of certain political agendas. It wasn't just about favoritism, it was about ensuring that the right people, the right causes, remained in control of the nation's legal framework. But the more the investigators uncovered, the more it became apparent that Boasberg wasn't working alone. His network of influence reached far beyond the courtroom, extending into the heart of the nation's capital. There were whispers of backroom deals, secret donations, and the systematic undermining of political opponents. Pam Bondi's gut told her this wasn't just about Judge Boasberg, it was a web of corruption that extended far beyond him. She had to be careful. Every step she took could be met with resistance, powerful forces pushing back to protect their own. One afternoon, while reviewing the newly uncovered evidence, Bondi received an anonymous tip. It was a coded message, sent through a burner email account, claiming that Boasberg's network of corruption had even deeper roots than anyone had realized. The email contained a single line that made her blood run cold: "Don't trust the source you're getting your information from. They're part of the game too." Bondi stared at the screen, unsure of whether the message was a warning or an attempt to derail the investigation. But one thing was clear, someone wanted to stop this from going public. And as the pieces continued to fall into place, Bondi knew that there was no turning back. The investigation had turned from exposing a single judge's misconduct to uncovering a vast, shadowy network that threatened the very fabric of American democracy. The stakes had just gotten higher. Pam Bondi was no stranger to high-pressure situations, but nothing could have prepared her for the storm that was now swirling around her. As word of the investigation began to leak, the media pounced. News outlets, both conservative and liberal, were hungry for the next big scandal, and this one promised to deliver. But with the spotlight came a backlash unlike anything she had ever faced. Boasberg's allies, both within the legal community and in the halls of Congress, wasted no time in circling the wagons. They began questioning the integrity of the investigation, attacking Bondi's credibility. Some called her partisan, others accused her of using the case to further her own political agenda. But the pressure wasn't just coming from the media or Boasberg supporters, it was coming from inside the investigation itself. Bondi had learned the hard way that in Washington, even those you trusted could turn on you in an instant. As the investigation expanded, a few of the federal agents involved started to act strangely. Phone calls went unanswered, files were mysteriously delayed, and key documents seemed to vanish into thin air. It was becoming clear that someone was trying to sabotage the case from within. One evening, as she was reviewing a particularly damning piece of evidence, a leaked court document showing Boasberg's ties to several well-known political donors, Bondi received an encrypted phone call. It was an unfamiliar voice, cold and calculating. "You need to stop. You have no idea how deep this goes," the voice warned. Bondi's pulse quickened. She could feel the walls closing in on her. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. "Doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is that you back off. Before this destroys everything." It wasn't a threat she could easily dismiss. Bondi wasn't afraid, but she understood the gravity of the situation. Whoever was behind this was willing to do whatever it took to keep the truth buried. The higher the stakes, the more dangerous the game became. With the investigation now under a microscope, the public pressure was mounting. Some accused Bondi of trying to make a name for herself at the expense of a respected judge's career. The backlash was swift, and Boasberg's defenders were relentless, attacking her on all fronts. Every word she spoke, every move she made, was scrutinized. But Bondi knew she couldn't back down. She had already come too far, and the truth needed to come out, no matter the cost. In a private meeting with the lead investigator, she shared her growing concerns about the mysterious phone call. She also mentioned her fears that someone within their own ranks might be working against them. The investigator, a seasoned pro with a no-nonsense attitude, looked at her with a knowing expression. "It's getting messy," he said grimly. "But that's how you know we're getting close. The closer you get to the truth, the more desperate they'll become." As the investigation continued, more evidence began to surface, revealing the extent of Judge Boasberg's manipulation. Hidden offshore accounts, secret meetings with powerful lobbyists, and even potential illegal campaign contributions, it was all there, buried under layers of deceit. The deeper Bondi dug, the more she realized that this wasn't just about exposing one corrupt judge. It was about taking down a corrupt system that had been operating right under the nation's nose for decades. With the weight of the case heavy on her shoulders, Bondi knew that exposing this corruption would come at a great personal cost. But there was no turning back now. The investigation had already set in motion a chain of events that no one could control, not even the powerful players trying to protect Boasberg. The battle was just beginning. The pressure was unbearable. Pam Bondi found herself increasingly isolated, surrounded by a growing army of adversaries. Those who once praised her for her fearless stance on corruption were now turning their backs. Some warned her to be cautious. Others hinted at more sinister consequences if she didn't stop digging. But Bondi's resolve had only hardened. Despite the mounting opposition, she and her team pressed on. The investigation was no longer a simple inquiry into Judge Boasberg's misconduct, it had morphed into something much bigger. What they were uncovering now wasn't just about a judge abusing his power, it was about a massive network that reached far beyond the judiciary and into the very heart of American politics. One afternoon, as Bondi sat in her office, reviewing a new set of encrypted files, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was an agent from the FBI, his face grave. "We've got a problem," he said, placing a thick file on her desk. "One of our own was compromised." Bondi's stomach sank. She flipped open the file and saw the name, Special Agent Frank Larson. He had been one of the most reliable members of the investigation, a man whose loyalty had been unquestioned, until now. The file contained evidence that Larson had been in contact with Boasberg's legal team. It wasn't just a casual conversation, there were meetings, exchanges of sensitive information, and hints of a larger cover-up. "He's been feeding them information," the FBI agent confirmed, his voice tight with disbelief. "We're pulling him off the case immediately, but we need to figure out how deep this goes. If Larson's compromised, who else is?" Bondi stared at the file, her mind racing. The walls were closing in, and now there was the very real possibility that someone within her own team was working against her. Who could she trust? But as troubling as that revelation was, it didn't deter her. Bondi knew she was getting closer to something enormous, something that would shake the very foundations of the nation's power structure. And no matter how many people tried to stop her, she couldn't turn back now. Meanwhile, the political climate had shifted. Allies who had once been vocal in their support of the investigation were now silent. Boasberg's defenders were circling the wagons more tightly than ever. On the outside, they painted the case as nothing more than a political witch hunt, a smear campaign orchestrated by Bondi herself. They had managed to turn the narrative in their favor, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the entire investigation. But inside, the team pressed forward with a sense of urgency. Time was running out. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered about Boasberg's ties to a shadowy network of political operatives, lobbyists, and wealthy donors who had long manipulated the judicial system for their own gain. Each new piece of evidence was like a new piece in a puzzle, revealing a far-reaching conspiracy that, if exposed, would alter the trajectory of American politics. Late one night, Bondi received a tip-off from a trusted source. It was a single photograph, grainy and black and white, showing Judge Boasberg in a clandestine meeting with a known political donor, one with a history of bribery charges. The image was shaky, but it was enough to confirm everything Bondi had suspected. The evidence was now undeniable. Boasberg's actions were not just unethical, they were criminal. But there was one catch, they needed to move fast. The political machine backing Boasberg was beginning to rally, and the judge was preparing to make a public statement, a strategic move to deflect attention from the growing investigation. Bondi knew the next few days would be critical. She needed to act swiftly, before Boasberg had a chance to cover his tracks completely. As she sat in her office, staring at the damning photograph, Bondi made a decision. It was time to go public, to reveal everything, no matter the personal cost. The truth needed to be heard. Pam Bondi knew the moment she made the decision to go public, there would be no going back. The storm that had been brewing would finally break, and there was no telling what the fallout would look like. It wasn't just her career at stake anymore, it was the very foundation of trust in the judicial system. The media had been waiting for a lead, and Bondi's press conference was the perfect storm. As the cameras flashed and reporters jockeyed for position, she stood at the podium, her face a mask of resolve. The moment had come to reveal the truth, every last detail, every hidden action, every twisted maneuver by Judge Boasberg and the powerful political figures behind him. "We have uncovered shocking and irrefutable evidence of corruption and abuse of power at the highest levels of our justice system," Bondi announced, her voice steady but cutting through the tension in the room. Judge Boasberg, a man who has long been trusted with the power to determine justice, has been manipulating the legal system for personal gain, and his actions have extended far beyond the courtroom. A ripple of gasps spread through the room as Bondi laid out the evidence. She showed the grainy photograph of Boasberg meeting with a notorious political donor, as well as leaked emails detailing the judge's involvement in influencing political decisions and judicial outcomes. She revealed wiretaps, financial records, and even audio recordings of private meetings where Boasberg discussed using his position for favors in exchange for political support. As the details spilled out, the room fell into stunned silence. Bondi's voice rang out, sharper now. These actions weren't just unethical. They were criminal. Judge Boasberg was taking bribes, trading his judicial power, and compromising the integrity of the very system that was meant to protect the American people. The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything Bondi had ever seen. The story dominated headlines for days, and the pressure on Boasberg to step down became overwhelming. He issued a statement denying all allegations, of course, but the evidence was too damning to ignore. The calls for an investigation into his actions were loud, relentless, and growing by the hour. Behind the scenes, the political establishment tried to contain the damage. But there was a problem: the more they tried to shut it down, the more the truth seemed to leak out. Other judges, influential figures in Washington, and even members of Boasberg's inner circle were now being dragged into the public eye. No one was safe. The net was widening, and people were beginning to talk. Boasberg's network had been vast, with ties to lobbyists, political action committees, and even foreign interests. Each connection only deepened the scandal. Bondi had known this wasn't just about exposing one corrupt judge, it was about breaking open a corrupt system. And now, the whole world was watching. But as the investigation gained momentum, the threats and warnings began to escalate. Pam Bondi received an email, more cryptic than the last, and this time the tone was far more direct: "You've opened Pandora's box. You will regret this. There's no coming back from what you've started." It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Bondi's team ramped up security, and she began to feel the weight of the risks she had taken. There were moments, fleeting and quiet, when doubt would slip in. But then, she would remember the evidence, the people whose lives had been destroyed by the very corruption she was exposing, and she would steel herself once more. The investigation was now officially a national crisis. Members of Congress were calling for Boasberg's impeachment. The FBI had opened a full criminal investigation into the judge and his associates. Meanwhile, public opinion was turning against him. The legal community was divided. Some condemned him, others still defended him. But with every new piece of evidence, the truth became harder and harder to deny. Bondi could feel the tide shifting. The days of backroom deals and unchallenged power were starting to crumble. She didn't know what the future held for her, but she knew one thing: she had taken a stand. And no matter what came next, she had exposed the corruption for the world to see. The days following Pam Bondi's press conference were a whirlwind. The political fallout was swift and brutal. Judge Boasberg's supporters tried to rally, but the mounting evidence against him left them struggling to maintain their ground. The public, once enamored by his reputation, was now demanding answers. The pressure to remove him from the bench was overwhelming, but Boasberg wasn't going down without a fight. Bondi's phone rang constantly, each call coming with its own barrage of demands, questions, or threats. The media continued to pick apart every word she had said, dissecting the implications of each piece of evidence she had unveiled. Meanwhile, Boasberg's defense team launched a counterattack, calling her investigation politically motivated and accusing her of using the case to further her own career. But in the court of public opinion, the tide was beginning to turn. As the criminal investigation into Boasberg deepened, new pieces of evidence emerged: hidden bank accounts, more documents linking Boasberg to shady political deals, and even more photographs of the judge attending clandestine meetings with high-powered figures. The FBI was relentless in its pursuit. They had now expanded their investigation to include several high-ranking individuals, many of whom were suspected of conspiring with Boasberg to further their own agendas. The list of those implicated was growing by the hour, and the public was beginning to realize that the corruption wasn't confined to a single judge, it was a system of power brokers and influencers who had been operating with impunity for years. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Boasberg remained defiant. In a public statement, he accused Bondi of smearing his name for political gain. He even suggested that the investigation was part of a larger conspiracy to discredit the judicial system itself. But as his statements grew more desperate, so did the evidence against him. In a stunning twist, a former colleague of Boasberg's, a judge from a neighboring district, came forward with bombshell testimony. The judge claimed that Boasberg had once confided in him about using his position for political leverage and personal enrichment. The former colleague had been too afraid to speak out at the time, but now, with the weight of public pressure on Boasberg, he had come forward. That testimony sent shockwaves through the legal community. Boasberg's defense was starting to crumble. The pressure was no longer just coming from outside forces, it was now coming from within his own circle. His allies were distancing themselves, and even some of the most powerful figures who had once supported him began to quietly pull back. But while the investigation seemed to be progressing, the personal toll on Bondi was undeniable. She had made enemies, not just within the political establishment, but within the justice system itself. As the pressure mounted, she started to receive more direct threats, ones that left no doubt as to the intentions of those trying to stop her. One evening, as she was returning to her apartment after another long day of meetings and press briefings, Bondi's car was sideswiped by a black SUV. The impact wasn't severe, but it was enough to jolt her. The driver of the SUV sped off, leaving Bondi shaken but unharmed. It was a clear message. Bondi knew she couldn't back down now, not after everything she had uncovered. She had already come too far. The fight was bigger than her. It was bigger than Boasberg. It was about ensuring that corruption, no matter how deeply rooted, would be exposed, and that those responsible would be held accountable. As the days dragged on, the investigation began to take its final shape. The FBI had gathered enough evidence to charge Boasberg with multiple counts of bribery, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. His trial was imminent, and the political world was holding its breath. Bondi's role in bringing this scandal to light had earned her both praise and condemnation. Some saw her as a hero, others as a partisan figure trying to destroy a respected member of the judiciary. But whatever the world thought of her, Bondi knew that she had done the right thing. The trial of Judge Boasberg was poised to be a historic moment, one that would shake the foundations of American politics and the judicial system. And Pam Bondi, for better or worse, would be at the center of it all. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, lawyers, and political figures. This wasn't just a trial, it was the event of the decade. The case against Judge Boasberg had drawn the attention of the nation, and Pam Bondi was front and center, ready to deliver the final blow that would bring down one of the most powerful figures in the U.S. judicial system. Boasberg sat in the defendant's chair, his once pristine reputation now shattered. His defense team fought relentlessly, trying to discredit the evidence and questioning the integrity of those involved in the investigation. But there was no denying the mounting weight of the charges against him. Bondi watched from the back of the courtroom as the prosecutor presented the final pieces of the case. The photographs, the bank records, the audio tapes, all the evidence that had taken months to uncover was now on display for the world to see. Each piece confirmed what everyone had suspected: Judge Boasberg had betrayed the very system he had sworn to uphold. The courtroom fell silent as Boasberg's defense lawyer made his final argument. He tried to paint the case as nothing more than a political attack, claiming that Bondi's investigation was part of a larger conspiracy to destroy a respected public servant. He even suggested that the evidence had been fabricated, that Boasberg was the victim of a vast, coordinated effort to ruin his career. But the moment Bondi stood up to deliver her closing statement, it was clear that the defense had no more ground to stand on. Her voice was strong, unwavering, as she addressed the court, and through the gallery, she spoke directly to the watching public. "This trial is about more than one man's crimes," Bondi said, her eyes scanning the room. "It's about the integrity of our legal system. It's about the trust that each of us places in those who are sworn to uphold the law. Judge Boasberg used his position to manipulate the justice system for personal gain. He used his power to distort the truth, to line his pockets, and to serve his political interests. This is not just a betrayal of the people in this courtroom, it's a betrayal of every American citizen. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The room was still, all eyes on her. The evidence is clear. We have proof of bribery, of conspiracy, of obstruction. We have proof that Judge Boasberg took bribes in exchange for judicial favors, that he manipulated legal outcomes to benefit the powerful, and that he betrayed the very oath he swore to uphold. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Bondi could feel the eyes of the nation upon her. She had come this far, and she knew the significance of the moment. This wasn't just about Boasberg's downfall, it was about ensuring that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. As the trial came to a close, the jury deliberated for hours. The tension was unbearable, and Bondi, though confident in the evidence, couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This case had become a symbol of the fight against corruption, and she knew that the world was watching. Finally, the verdict came. The jury filed back into the courtroom, and the judge asked for their decision. We, the jury, find the defendant, Judge Boasberg, guilty on all charges. The words rang out, a resounding victory for truth and justice. As the gavel came down, a wave of relief swept over Bondi. She had succeeded. Boasberg's fall from grace was complete. The system had been shaken to its core, but it had endured. And through it all, Pam Bondi had remained steadfast. The weeks that followed were a blur. Boasberg's sentencing came quickly, he was sentenced to decades in prison for his crimes. But the implications of the trial didn't end with his conviction. The investigation had revealed a deep-seated network of corruption, and the ripple effects were felt throughout the legal and political systems. Politicians were forced to resign. Legal reforms were put into motion. And across the country, citizens began to believe that change was possible. The trial had restored a sense of trust in the system, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear: no one could ever underestimate the power of accountability. As for Pam Bondi, her role in exposing the truth cemented her place in history. Though she had made enemies along the way, she had also earned the respect of many for her unwavering commitment to justice. The political world would never be the same, and neither would she. She had started with a single, dangerous discovery, a whisper of corruption, and had brought down an empire of deceit. In the end, Pam Bondi had done what so many had failed to do before her: she had held the powerful accountable. And the justice system, for the first time in a long time, had been restored.